this gray area when it comes to mental health, where it's like what you were describing. Oh, I don't know how to connect with these people. I feel isolated. And that's like, that can be the beginning of a problem, right? Or that's a sign that something's off. And yet it's not like necessarily some kind of diagnosable disorder. We can't necessarily put it into a box, and we don't know what to do about it. Right. And we don't know how to talk about it, which is part of the problem. And so that's part of what I'm trying to address or begin to address. I don't expect to completely address it with one study, but the hope is that with this work, it can open the door to that. So one of the ways I talk about it is I call it identity distress, or here in the title, it was impression management distress. But the point is, it's distress around interaction with people in everyday life. So you see, even in your case that you're describing, you're out of the military and you're just not connecting with people in a way that feels clear or meaningful or authentic for you, right?
And I guess identity distress to me does sound kind of like, well, I'm no longer in the military. So that, because we do tend to wrap our identities up around the things that we are doing.
Exactly. So the way that I then, so basically what I've come up with is a model for understanding that process of distress around interaction, as well as potential dramaturgical tools for coping. And you've already named one, whole set of tools, which can come from improv. So like, what was, for example, for you from improv, what helped you? I mean, part of it sounds like it was the communion with other people, which is a huge one for most of them, but
yeah. I actually feel a little teary thinking about it.
Really?
Yeah. Just because it was because, it's so supportive. And the whole thing is learning how to trust other people to be there. And also it was definitely helpful. If you are an interrupter, can I just say taking improv lessons will help you stop interrupting people. And it helps with active listening. These are the tools we take to corporations to help them build teamwork. And I didn't know, I wasn't aware I was using it therapeutically, but when I stopped doing it, I did notice suddenly that I don't have something that is helping me through this anymore. So I don't know. I'm not too sure.
Well, part of it, did you feel more heard? Was part of
Yeah, for sure. People aren't constantly interrupting you and the thing with improv is it's yes and. So you must actively listen to hear what they're saying, and then you want to build on it. So you're not waiting to say whatever you had, because if it's not relevant, you've got nothing to work with. So you both are staying in or the whole group are staying intentionally engaged with each other. And I think especially in America, I've traveled we don't do that. Our brains are so muddied. We're constantly engaged with all these other stresses.
Right.
I don't know.
Exactly. Well, so in terms of my findings, so that's one of the things. One of the main things is an idea of the beginnings of what can be a kind of a dramaturgical toolkit, or a toolkit from theater, from different theater practices that can help with all these different ways in which we can feel disconnected, or where it's just communication is not working with other people in everyday life, or distressed for all kinds of reasons, oftentimes related to our identity. And in your case is a great example, because it's you were in this transitional process, right? You had been in the military, and now you're coming back to so-called civilian society, or however you were thinking of it, right? And so then how do you re-understand, how do you reimagine who you are? And that's the other thing from theater and from improv and practices like that, is that you can the imagination is such a big deal, right? Because you can become a different character. You can visualize a different reality. You can implement tools like yes and into your everyday life, where you say, wait a minute, I'm going to actually use this as a way to connect with people. You can actually change the rules that aren't working for you, and you can use those spaces to practice that.
Yeah, I'm curious. What got you interested in doing this research?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was really I think a process for how I got here, because research, is such a weird and intuitive process. Actually, I think a lot of people who do any kind of scientific research will end up telling you it's not straightforward at all. Like you might have some kind of inkling or a hunch, and then you explore it, and then, and then maybe you adjust. And it was very much that in that, well, first off, I was a child immigrant and refugee in the US. So I think that helped me have some perspective on the fact that everyday life is like already has these like different scripted cultural components.
Yeah. You kind of talk about being like a natural ethnographer.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think, well, because part of it is, and, it's just already if you are, if you're new, if you feel like an alien in a different country, you're already observing it from that distance. So that's one thing as a child where it was like, I very much felt like an alien at 6.5, came from the Soviet Union, was a Jewish refugee, and in Iowa, which is like completely,
you
felt like another
technically
planet.
were an alien.
Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah, no. I'm working on a TV pilot about that actually.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt like an alien, Logan?
Yeah. Well, that's, it's kind of weird. I'm sure I don't have the same level of alienation, I suppose, especially Iowa. Wow.
Yeah, totally foreign land. Like, my God, right. Iowa.
But I do remember, talking to somebody when I was in my 20s about a relationship and saying something about like the culture clash. And they said, "Oh, where is she from?" And I was like, "Oh, no, me. Like, she's American. She's like very American." But I do feel like I grew up in a way, like my grandmother's German, and she kind of half raised me, half my parents.
Yeah.
But in general,
do you speak it or?
Barely,
yeah, und
barely.
Ich kann Deutsch. Ich war eine Austauschschülerin. I was an exchange student. So
we're just going to make this a German show.
Yeah,
right?
like
wunderbar.
Ja, hoffentlich wir haben es in deutsche Anhören.
No, I not enough. Like when I was in Germany, somebody was like, "Wie geht's?" And I was like, "Yeah." That's a German joke.
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
not even the correct answer.
Exactly. That's how are you doing? Yes. But
just random. We're just going to do random touristic phrases. I can do that too.
Danke.
Bitteschön.
We'll save them.
But yeah, so the idea of feeling kind of like an outsider, though, I feel like maybe I didn't get it so strongly, perhaps, but I definitely grew up with that sense that everybody around me is in a different world,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you became an actor?
Yes. No, I think that's part of, the world that I grew up in was a little bit crazy, I felt as a kid. And then everybody else, I think there was a big political divide too. I feel like I grew up in a much more conservative area from a weird liberal Unitarian, like hippie family.
Yes.
And so that was very strange for me. But also at home, like the world that I was in was fairly chaotic. And I think I went into theater because it does provide an opportunity as an actor. You can explore your feelings and have the safety of it's not really you, and especially explore territory that you wouldn't get to otherwise.
Yeah.
You're thrown into a situation where you're in these extreme emotional situations sometimes. And in my regular life, I think I was trying to protect myself by having some level of regularity or control over it. And I needed to sort of vent at times and like unleash at times, and theater was a way for me to do that.
Yeah.
And can I ask, like, was there like in your everyday life at a certain age, like were you feeling uncomfortable or like you couldn't connect before you got into theater? Like, was there something?
Yeah. For me, my mom described me sometimes as an adult. She said, when you were a kid, you were kind of like an alien that was trying to figure out what this planet was like. And I was a very philosophical, introspective kid.
She was preparing you for this show.
Yeah. And so as a kid, and there were times where I felt sort of less human because of that too, where it's like everybody seems to be on the same page, but I feel like I'm just not connecting.
Huh. And what do you think it was? Or
I feel the same way too. And like being like growing up in a pretty liberal environment, like I grew up right outside of Houston. And like half of my family is extremely concerned. And like now I'm definitely an alien. Like they think I'm radical, and I don't even think I'm radical. I'm like thinking everyone should have a home does not sound radical to me, but it does to them. So I feel like I can kind of engage in that. And I'm just curious, Marianna, if that's something like that you find common with people, and why this it does feel to me like the research seems natural, like it kind of should have been there, but yet you're the one debuting it. You're the breakthrough researcher on this.
Yeah, and well, I'm glad it feels natural. It took me years to convince to convince enough faculty members that it made sense and that this is something that is important, because I think it's to put something into an academic frame and make it clear why it's important from that perspective is a whole other ballgame. And I can't believe I used a sports metaphor.
Look at you go.
It's a real home run reference.
But but that's actually why I was starting to interview both of you, because and why I was wondering for you,
we're research subjects now.
Sure.
Well, no, because it is fascinating for me every time. I was wondering what was it that was different, because there are all of these universal themes that emerge. So would you mind mentioning?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What was different about?
What was it that was different that you felt that you needed something more, another tool in your life?
Well, and I definitely didn't realize any of this until much later. At the time, I thought I was just exploring this wonderful possibility. But later on, as I did more work on myself, I realized, I really needed that at the time. And a lot of it, I think, was that I sought stability as a kid by being more intellectual and trying to create a world around me that was very rational and stable. And theater was my way of getting out of that.
Okay. I relate to you so much.
Oh, okay.
But I only did theater for a short time period when I was younger. I didn't really get back into it till later. Yeah. So
that's actually one of the several themes that's a common theme for people that I ended up labeling that uncertainty distress, which it sounds like you both relate to that one. I mean, there's so many themes that you can find across people, and for different people, certain themes are more prominent at different times, but uncertainty distress, people will have. So in one of my main case studies where this was really, really clear was in this autistic individual. And for him, and he couldn't see, was also face blind. So he couldn't see faces.
Oh, yes. So I'm looking at his the page where you...
Are you trying to read my chapter on radio, Rachel?
I'm not. No. I was looking at the names of... You named a few people. I was thinking about Kay a minute ago.
This is Alex.
Alex,
if
okay.
You're trying to name
Is it in the paper?
The pseudonym, though. The pseudonym. I'm definitely...
Okay. Is this available on LexisNexis?
This will be available on ProQuest very shortly.
Yay! Yes. Congrats.
Yeah. So my pseudonym for him is Alex, and the deal with him was, so he couldn't see faces. So I'm interacting with you right now, and a major part of it is that I can make eye contact with you. I can see your facial expression. It makes it so much easier to communicate. But imagine we were interacting and we can't see each other's faces, and yet this is supposed to be a normal interaction where, in person.
Right. And these are, if I remember correctly, this is a disorder where people can't recognize others by their face. All the faces just kind of look the same. He can see, right? He's not blind. He's just face blindness. Is that right?
Right. Well, it's so basically, it's a neurological condition that I think usually people are born with. It's possible that it could probably happen from brain damage as well. But basically the brain can't put together a gestalt, which is a whole of people's faces. And you might be able to see a feature, maybe you could make out my hair or something, but not the full. They can't piece together the full face. So it makes it really, really hard to communicate, as you can imagine, if you can't see how a facial expression comes together. Because actually that's a really sophisticated cognitive ability that we have. And so if that's not there, so for someone like him, imagine the anxiety around interaction.
Oh, yeah.
So this is someone who became an incredible improviser. He was on an improv troupe at his university, and he was one of the clown play participants that was, so one of my one of the practices that I studied was also clown play, and he was in that class.
I remember when I saw you last a couple years ago, you were like encouraging people to do clown school or something.
Oh yeah. So for me personally, because the way I do the research, like I really embed myself, participant observation, you just like become one of the people. And so I was taking these classes too.
Yeah. Immersive journalism.
It's a lot like that.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because I was getting the benefit of these trainings, and clown play was probably my favorite because in terms of just like what you were talking about, like with that emotional engagement, like it really works with your authentic emotion. I feel like more than any of the other practices where you play with your real emotions, and you have to engage, and you have to make eye contact, and there's trust developed, but it's also playful and fun, and everything gets exaggerated, but it's based on how you actually feel.
Oh, so like when clowns are responding, like, and they do the big sound face, they're like actually really sad. They're not being they're doing it playfully, but like maybe you really did just hurt their feelings, and like
it's possible. I mean, it's exaggerated.
Yeah.
But it's a caricature of that, but it has a grain of truth, which is why, clowns are so great in hospitals and places like that, because their empathy is off the charts. Like that's part of the main training in clown play and in clown in general. Yeah. Because they're just really good at connecting. And so that's why they're so therapeutic, but it's also why it's so great to study it if you're feeling disconnected in your life in any way. And so also, so for someone, so back to Alex, like for someone like him, having these kinds of trainings that are so structured. So if you're somebody with uncertainty distress and unpredictable and distress around the unpredictability of everyday life, to get to be in a practice that where there are rules for how you're engaging, just like what you were describing with improv, where it was just so good for you that people had to stop and engage in a way that felt more connected for you, and they couldn't do anything else. And that's the other great thing about these practices is you have to engage. That's like central to all of them. Then it really creates a space where he feels so much more comfortable because it is more predictable because there's rules around it, and that's part of it. And then there's also like that sharing and authentic communion. And so for him, that was a way to deal with it. So I remember there was this one incident where he was in the elevator with someone, and they said to him, "It's laundry day." And the way he tells the story was he was so frustrated. He was like, "I didn't know what to do. I wanted to spit on her shoe, but I just wanted to swear. But I just said not." But he just like did the yes and he just like nodded and smiled and just, but because it's that frustration of not being ready. And it wasn't because he's, in any way like violent or angry, really. It's because he just wants every interaction to go well. And for him, he wants to feel prepared, and he can't, it's just, such a struggle.
I feel like that's a huge problem, because I've done a series, and I'll be releasing some of the interviews. I've done a series of interviews with people with PTSD, and that's definitely something that becomes very distressing because you're not reacting in a way that is standard. And so you become very hyper aware of that. And you can't stop like analyzing, like I did this, and, their brain's literally different. Like people with PTSD, I always say it is a physical disability. You just can't see that the brain pathways have changed and, things like that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean,
yeah. And the truth is like everyone's brain is different, but then you get stigmatized if you have a diagnosis and there isn't like a destigmatized language to talk about it and to have understanding around it. It's either you give the diagnosis or you pretend like everything is fine. There's no in between.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to work with around this, where it's like, what about that gray area where probably the majority of people at some point are struggling and they don't know how to connect and they don't know how to talk about it.
I think that's probably why improv was so fun, because there isn't really a wrong reaction. They make sure to stress that, like, there's no wrong reaction. Just like if you start a scene and somebody says something that seems really cheery, but you cry, all right, now we have joy or something interesting in this moment. Something's happening and it's engaging. And like all of the ableism in that world just goes out the door because, I don't know, while it's also entertainment and it's also often done comedically, somehow it requires authenticity. in order to do it well.
Yes, it does. So that was one of my key findings, actually, that authenticity is one of the main things for people to feel, well, first of all, to get better if they are struggling with with everyday anxiety around who they are. Because again, back to your great example where it's like you came out of the the Navy, sorry.
Yeah, don't get it wrong.
I know, it's so damn. Yeah, so you came out of the Navy and you're not connecting in a way that feels authentic to you.
Right. And I already wasn't connecting very well in the Navy either, because, I'm very left, like I said, I'm a pretty leftist person. And
yeah.
So it was, and then I didn't have anywhere to fit in outside of it either. It was rough. It was a rough time period. So the term I came up with for this, for like what it is that we all pretty much naturally in this, so-called contemporary society and that we live in, try to do in correcting for this or easing this up is I call it face ease or face easing practices, because this is a complement to a theory from Irving Goffman around face work. The idea with face work is that in every interaction, we want to project we want to make some kind of impression. Like right now I'm on your show. I want you to hopefully think that I'm a kind person who's listening, and whatever it is, whatever impression I'm trying to make. I just want you to think I'm hot.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
You did it.
Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, but exactly. But and oftentimes in every interaction, and usually obviously it's some kind of positive impression. Yeah. And so he calls that like the line that you're trying to maintain. So if it's like, like even with Alex in the elevator, he wanted that person to just think he's nice. So he suppressed this urge to just scream because he was so frustrated that was an unpredicted interaction. And he really didn't want to be interacting at that time. And he wasn't planning, Yeah. So, but for him, it was really important that, this impression, hey, I'm a nice person. And, but that's also important for him. And so, in every interaction, he calls it face work. So we're doing this work to maintain, face in all these ways, or, and there's
face like reputation. Is that what you mean by face?
So face, face can mean so many things. That's why it's easier to go into the nuances of it.
Okay.
So in an interaction, he calls it the line because it's like that specific thing. So like you just asked me a question. So maybe you want me to think that you're engaged. Good job.
Yeah,
you did
nailed it.
I just want everybody to think I'm hot.
That's true too. Yeah.
No, yeah.
So that was the line that you were trying to maintain with me, and right. So, so I think it's easier to think about it that way because he has this huge overarching theory. But face work overall is like this work that we do to maintain these impressions, basically.
Okay.
And then, so I came up with the term in this study of face ease. So the idea being that like face work can get exhausting.
Yes. Interacting in general gets, right? Usually after these shows, like, because I'll do three shows a week. This one's mine, but and then I'm like, I can't talk to anybody else any other days of the week. Just
Yeah, and I bet your dog is a really face easing soul, right?
Oh yeah, okay,
right? Because it's like, and you can be yourself with her. So part of the idea with face ease is you can be more authentic in spaces or with people, or maybe even animals. That makes sense too. That are face easing. Yeah. So you can also create a more face easing space, practice, interaction. So, somebody, if they have like a great romantic partner, they come home to them and they're more comfortable, whatever it is, right? It's like we're all seeking, or that friend group or whomever it is, where you don't have to do as much work to prove that you're basically a good person.
Yeah, that seems like the kind of environments, the face easing environments that you get to are the ones that you want to get to after you leave work. For most people, where it sounds like work is like a very, what's the opposite of face easing? Face tightening?
Face struggling? Well, no, because it's face work, but I guess it's also, you can get to maybe face exhaustion or whatever it is, right?
Face exhaustion.
There it is. There it is.
Because your face, like fake smiling can literally become painful. So trying to hold that stupid smile all day long, like, I really can't stand your workout.
Yeah. And if you're fake smiling, that is just the worst. Speaking of performance in everyday life, that's like, the worst kind, right? Because it's not coming from an authentic place. So you are just lying all day, and lying is the most tiring thing. I mean, if at least it's coming from an authentic place, like for a clown, you're not so tired. So that's why something like clown is a face easing practice, because you get to release real emotions. And so, like, for example, in the exercises, you might be, they'll say something like, okay, now express sadness, and you'll just, exaggerate crying or laughing at each other, or whatever, or like joy, but it's all coming from a real place. And that can be so helpful and face easing if you're walking around all day pretending to be something else, and suddenly you're in a room where you just get to scream whatever emotion you want. How relieving is that? Right?
Yeah, I think definitely something that I've learned over the years, because while working on myself, I also am working on like interpersonal relationships and communication techniques, and something that I always try to cultivate within any friendship is like the ability to say exactly what you need to say. Yeah. And I'm not going to hold it against you. Sometimes like we have, like, I think that too often we feel like we can't do that. And that's when we are performing. Like, interacting with some people, to me, can feel like a performance, because like, it's not okay to say all the things you think to everyone like in a work environment, for example.
Yeah, you have to hold a lot back, and exactly.
Rephrase things the way,
Right. And so in this research, what I also found is like the more, the other key thing is like the more you have potential, distress around stigma and other things that you're working through on an everyday basis, the more exhausting that work is, that everyday work. There's an emotional work component to it. There's a stigma management component to it. And then there's the everyday face work, which is just the impression management we all have to do all the time. So, for example, with Kay, who you already mentioned, that was this trans non-binary individual who was experiencing frequent misgendering distress at work. So their coworker.
That's infuriating.
Well, but it's also, it happens so often. I mean, it's really, I think, representative of what goes on in work cultures all over the US. But, the wrong, getting called the wrong pronoun, there was one, I think even like higher up person who would use their dead name and things like that, where it was just, really, I mean, it was just so painful for them.
Like a hostile work environment.
But the thing is that the people that were doing it were not they weren't realizing to what extent they're causing harm.
But they knew they were doing something.
It depends. Like if it's a customer, they may not know you.
Right. Okay. Okay. I see. I just get really defensive, around my friends.
No, I know. It's
you
so
do
painful.
It wrong, and you don't have to say anything. I'll do it.
Yeah, it's tough. And they were constantly having to be a kind of, activist for themselves. Yeah. I mean, which is so tough because it's, talk about exhaustion. I mean, but that's also why, there have been, diagnoses that have been like gender dysphoria. But the thing is, okay, so they would, in the interview, it was interesting. They would sometimes say, oh, so this happened, for example, this happened at work, and they used the wrong pronoun, and I felt dysphoric. And for them, it was like they actually like felt dizzy, and like they felt physical symptoms. And so in that case, maybe the diagnosis is at least a way to make it real. And it's not that there's something actually wrong with them. This is the problem. There's a pathology implied if there's a diagnosis. But right now in this society, there's no way to make it seem like it matters otherwise, unless we put a diagnosis on it. But as soon as we put a diagnosis on it, we're also pathologizing that person and saying, there's all these bad implications around so-called mental illness, right?
Yeah, and it almost feels like a misnomer, because it makes me think of like the social model, because I remember, talking about disabilities, and a a friend of mine who was deaf, I had mentioned like something about being disabled, and they're like, I'm not disabled. We're not disabled. And I asked them to explain. And so like the social model is that there's nothing wrong with the individual. It's society disabling them from being able to participate fully. So not being able to hear doesn't mean there's something pathologically wrong with you.
Right.
The TV stations that refuse to provide captions are disabling you from being able to participate the way hearing people do.
Right. It's a relationship. If the society, treats you in that way, you don't really have a chance.
Right. And obviously our society is super ableist. So whenever something's not working for somebody else, they're like, well, let's label what's wrong with them and not fix it instead of saying, oh, let's accommodate you.
Right. And even if there is like some attempt to so-called fix it, again, even that metaphor, like the problem is with them, right? There's something not working with them. There isn't a clear understanding that this is an interaction, which is why, all this work that I've done is looking very much at interaction. And so actually for Kay, they were a participant in neo-futurism.
Was that the group here in Andersonville?
No, so neo-futurism did start in Chicago. So yeah, so you're talking about the venue that was here for many, many years, and they're still doing things. It's still here.
Yep.
It's still here. And as part of my research, I did a class with Greg Allen, the founder, who was teaching at the time, and then I got to interview people afterwards, and Kay was in that class, and so for them, really like. These kinds of practices, especially like an autobiographical practice like that, is so great for someone who just needs to feel like, because they're really reimagining who they are and how they're perceived in a way that feels authentic to them. Right.
Right. So can I ask, I want to understand exactly like what the model looks like. So like what like mental illness or disabilities are the focus, and what specific parts of the learning process are the parts that actually become therapeutic and like somebody looking to get into this, what should they want to find?
Okay. So let me get into the model a bit. So I'm gonna, since I started talking about Kay, I will explain their process as an example. So we've already imagined Kay being misgendered at work, right? And they had this barista job. Immediately what they experience is what I'm calling acceptance distress, because it's really just about like being seen for whom they feel they authentically are, right? Around being accepted, rather than being like projecting some image of them as like so the other side of it is people were often concerned with what I'm terming self-image actualization distress, which is like get other people to think that you're competent or you're, successful or whatever it is. And it's really about what other people think.
And what was that called again?
Self-image actualization distress. So it's focused on your image and on people thinking that you're a certain way and that you've achieved a certain status, a certain, ability, skill set, whatever it is. Acceptance distress is more focused on like what authentically is important for you. It still involves other people. There needs to be communion over it. Like there needs to be a good interaction around it where the other person actually recognizes that this is, who you are. Just so with Kay, if the person is using the wrong pronoun and not using the right name and so on, then that's a problem. So it's not that they don't care about other people, but it needs to really be aligned with who they feel they authentically are. So it's being accepted. And then, so then in the model, the next step is their immediate coping response. So Kay was had been in theater for many years and had all kinds of theater tools. Their toolkit was full in terms of this idea of the dramaturgical toolkit. And so they're a really interesting case study. In that moment, they described to me that in that environment as a barista, when they get exhausted from all of that work of around misgendering, distress, and all these other things, they actually they play a kind of altered, like almost an altered maiden in distress role, but not exactly maiden in distress. But like, so I'm so helpless, I'm so tired, but really because they're feeling dysphoria and fatigue, but they're using their theater training to take the fatigue and just show it as if they're tired at work and they're almost like a ditzy maiden in distress character or something. I don't know how to use this cash register all of a sudden. It's just like, this little like ditzy, funny little thing. And that also gets sympathy from customers and can even get them better tips, but it also allows them to actually express something really genuine that they're feeling, which is absolute exhaustion from having to constantly deal with a situation where they don't get to feel authentic, right? So that's the immediate coping response and tools that they used in that case. So how I analyze that is that from that, they get some temporary face ease. They get a little bit of relief in that moment.
Because they step into a character and out of just their genuine self in order to express an emotion, right?
Yeah, that character allows them to get at least closer. It's not 100% because it's still like they're not a maiden barista in distress, but it is closer to how they actually feel. They get to express a real feeling of like, I am just so tired of dealing with everything. Yeah. And so it gets, since that part is genuine, it's not fully lying. It's actually using something really authentic because they have this high level acting training. They're able to really use it for, in these situations to not make it feel totally forced.
Yeah.
Like it's really clever actually what they're doing in the moment, right?
Yeah. I'm curious if either of you have ever used those. Logan, have you ever used an acting tool to get out of expressing like how you actually feel, to like express how you feel, but like not like, for me, I know because anger issues come with like traumatic brain injuries and stuff, and PTSD, which I've worked a lot on it, but like, I definitely have channeled like what I really thought, and I had to like take it and like use my improv, like almost like a character as well.
Yeah.
Or turn it into a joke. More, I always just considered it like a coping mechanism or masking or something, but I don't know.
Can you think of a specific instance that?
I have to think about it. I've probably done it a lot. What about
I can relate to the mask metaphor. I mean, that's something that I feel like sometimes what you're describing to me, it's kind of like a mode of being. And the weird thing about it is I feel like when you're in or out of that mode, it's sort of easy to identify. Like after a while, you sort of like, wait a minute, in certain context, I'm always this way, this is like just, I'm showing only one part of myself to this group of people. And it just seems like to me, that's the weird thing about it is that it could be authentic still, but it still feels like not your whole self in those moments.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I think honestly, like I probably haven't done that very well. I think what, I worked on
I'm
was
bad
like,
at it.
I am bad at it.
Well,
like,
no, this is the point. You can become better at it. That's the point.
I'm very like authentic and genuine. And I just have this, I'm like, it should be okay. And so even when it's not okay, I'm like, I think it should be okay. So I'm going to express myself the way I'm feeling. And it's not exactly productive all the time. Particularly like when I was trying to work in a corporate position, which is not an environment for me or people like me. What I was trying to do was like learn phrases, like they teach, like coach you phrases like this is how a person in this situation would respond, or this is the phrase you want to use instead of this, like but it just felt so disingenuous because like I wasn't still expressing how I felt.
How you actually felt in the moment.
Yeah.
Like none of that was actually authentic to you is the point.
Yeah. And so like it just didn't really help. It made me even more frustrated.
Exactly.
That I'm trying to, follow this list of like normie language that,
Yeah. And then that accumulates that fatigue too, right? So you're getting exhausted and you're not expressing anything real inside of you. So then there's, so basically there's two more steps, in this process that I've identified. So the next step, for Kay, they get a temporary relief from that strategy that they used. And then, so now I'm thinking about it. Okay, so then what happens later? What happens after this has happened? Maybe days, weeks, months later. So for Kay, what was really helpful was they were part of a theater community on their campus. They were part of quite a few different groups where they were able to reimagine all kinds of frustrating experiences like this one, or they could at least, because they could play characters that were authentic to them, oftentimes non-binary characters or more femme characters, or sometimes themselves, where, they really had the opportunity to reimagine the things that were so difficult, because that was only a partial, because that was like partially authentic, but it also was still somewhat
it is still performative. Yeah.
Right. It's still somewhat of an act. It's not completely who they are. So then
I'm curious how Alex would have dealt with that. What would have been the difference in how he...
The other thing, so with Kay, so just one more point about Kay before I get into... No, that's okay. Before I get into Alex, is that the other thing for Kay that was like really... not completely authentic or at least like not maybe necessarily what they were going for as a non-binary person, is that they were submitting to a gender stereotype even as they were getting relief and being a kind of like maiden in distress, right? Because they were, showing that they were in some way like, were lacking in being able to cope with the situation. And it's there's a term for it around that oftentimes actually trans folks fall into when they are forced into a binary called doing deference. So suddenly you have to, you fall into, especially if you're falling into a stereotypical female role of doing deference in that situation where you're kind of powerless.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the part that wasn't entirely necessarily authentic to what they're really going for. Right.
Yeah. So, and gender is performative by nature anyways, like.
Yes. And that's why looking at a case study like this, like really shows that. And of course that's the case for all of us in some way, but here it's really clear. And, and so for them, I think, so it was like this complex thing in the long term where, my overall recommendation is like, if the more it's possible to synthesize and actually be aware of these experiences and reimagine them, the better. And then the more you can have these enhanced tools. So, for Kay, it's a really complex case where it's like, to some extent they relieved the distress, but to some extent it was still like, pretty imperfect and still exhausting. Right.
I mean, what do you think would be perhaps like the best way? Like in your research is there a better way to like, other than to just like not care what people think about you?
I mean, it helps to take, that's funny because to not care what people think about you is actually one of the stances that participants took, which they took from improv. Because one of the practices that I looked at was social anxiety improv, where it was targeting people who identified themselves as having social anxiety. And what individuals often took from that practice was that they would use this phrase. They would say, "Oh, it's not that serious."
Yeah. And I got to tell you, so I was just so ready to start doing something and living again by the time I started. I had one free lesson class, and I mean, the place was still growing. It's Station Theater in Houston, Texas. Yeah. And it was very small. And they were having auditions for their new house troops. And I went. I'd only taken one 30-minute intro seminar. Yeah. And I auditioned anyways, and they put me on the team, and I'm like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Yeah. But I was so ready to just get up there and have fun. And then it comes to our first night, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so scared. I'm going to mess up." And I just remember the owner, she came to me and she said, "Look, Rachel, everyone wants to see you succeed. Nobody here is against you. We're all here to have fun. The audience wants to be entertained. Right. They don't want to see you fail. That's not fun for anyone. You having fun is fun. And that's really all there is to it." And
yes,
that's that's what carried me through. And then I did tons of performing after that, and it felt true.
Yeah. I mean, if you can take like a new perspective like that, I mean, it's really, sometimes it's a metaphor. Sometimes it's just really a different stance to everyday interaction. Like it's fun, or it's not that serious, or be more playful. Yeah. If you can import that into like, because now you're really reimagining your everyday interactions is like, okay, maybe the stakes aren't life or death. Maybe there's a level of play to this. Like that's already a completely different, and you're also you're imposing this metaphor of play onto everyday life, right? So you can take those ideas, you can take those metaphors from theater and suddenly think about your life and your role in it in a different way. So for Alex, whom you asked about, he actually was really a master of using comedy for coping. So that included improv, clown play, and in terms of, that key component of like really finding community, and communion is really a key component for this. He had an improv troupe where he really felt like he could be himself. They had these very specific kinds of jokes that they would make together, and kind of a lingo that they developed around clickbait speech. Like he loved to talk about that, and just that was huge for him, and that he really felt like he could be himself. And I watched him perform with his improv troupe at one point, and he just really there was this moment on the stage where, and we talked about it after, he was in an interaction with another person. It was a long form improv, and
the best.
And and one person is like, my name is Joseph. And then, because, in improv, oftentimes you have to say the name, and you say, that's like part of the deal. And he ended up saying the same thing, that his name was also Joseph, right?
That's a fun game.
Yeah. But and he didn't even intentionally do it. It was sort of more of like a little awkward slip in interaction where, sometimes he still feels a little uncomfortable, or he just gets confused, but it turned into the funniest thing.
Yes. That's why improv is so beautiful. Yeah. Did you do improv, Logan?
I've done improv before. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the second you said, my name is Joseph, I was like, oh, I'm invested in this scene. Joseph meets Joseph.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really the takeaways are really about finding those face-easing spaces, practices in people where you can have a sense of yourself as who you authentically are.
Yeah.
And always, as much as possible, having a level of awareness about it, being able to synthesize it. So meaning really being able to process it in a place where you do have that communion. It really boils down to authenticity, awareness, and communion, I would say.
Yeah.
And actually thinking about it, synthesizing it, not just brushing it under the rug and pretending, because when we're pretending all the time and we're lying to ourselves, it's exhausting, and it gets much worse, right? It builds. Yeah. We need to release. We have emotions, and
yeah. And I mean, right? that is what leads to identity crisis, I suppose. Cause I feel like I'm constantly performing, and I can't show people who I really am. And
yeah.
You were shaking it can.
Yeah. It can lead to, I think, all kinds of problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had some problems, but Logan, you were nodding your head some a minute ago. Did you?
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking about how theater, those principles of authenticity and play and listening and community, when you don't have those elements in any kind of theater, we've emphasized improv and clowning, but I feel like you need that in other kinds of theater too. Otherwise, when you've lost those things, you can tell. And maybe that's to me, I think it's kind of, when it's working, you can just tell. And so it provides an easy barometer for things like authenticity. And that's what's weird about the contradiction is always that theater.
What do you mean? Explain that for people who haven't practiced theater. Because I think part of the reason why this is so great with you guys is because I think anyone who understands or has practiced any form of theater, improv, or performance, this will feel intuitive.
Well, I think I think with theater that is rehearsed, unlike improv, and probably in improv too, it's just that in improv, you're discovering it while you're on stage usually. But I feel like in rehearsal, you're sort of experimenting usually to find the moments of authenticity or to find really just what feels good in a way. Like it's a very intuitive process where I feel
and you're
like
supported in that, right? That's the other key.
Yes, exactly. Because of what Rachel was talking about, where it's like, nobody wants this to be uncomfortable. Nobody wants this to, right? We're all searching for something that'll bring us together when we do this thing. And so what's weird is that as you're doing it, you're sort of like feeling around for something and experimenting and changing the dynamic until these moments happen that just feel completely authentic and real and alive and vibrant. And the weird thing is you don't see them coming usually, right? Like I'm sure in improv too, when you're on stage, it's like sometimes things are just clicking and everybody's in sync and suddenly you feel it and you realize like, oh, this is it right now,
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why I loved improv so much is because it required like for it to work, that you and the other people around you are being honest and supportive and listening. And I mean, even if you're playing characters, you still have to use the authentic skills of interaction, because otherwise, like you can tell it's, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but
well, I'll give you an example. Like from Clown, one of the more like basic beginning exercises was just to be able to hold eye contact, right? And that's like one of the most, relatable things, right? And so, and these were, this was a class of college students who many of them felt very uncomfortable holding eye contact. So even that exercise was incredible for some of them, where they had to get over the fear of actually standing there and consistently holding eye contact with the teacher. So here's yet another, just like, a very, what you would imagine, a very basic skill that you're getting through theater practice, through a theater tool that creates an environment where you can actually practice that. I mean, it's harder to maybe pull people over and, we're going to practice eye contact here. It's like, but it's really like that space where it actually, you can work on this stuff.
Yeah. I can remember we would literally do that in improv training. Like we would get uncomfortable or like, okay, for our next exercise, we're going to spend an entire minute staring directly into your partner's eyes and not saying a word. Let's get used to this. So I'm wondering, like, were there specific kinds of techniques that were particularly helpful? Because like, I think that's why, God, I just can't say enough about improv, and especially like, like we did move into the corporate world where we would go, especially like when they were putting together new teams for big projects. And then we would take them through a series of trainings. And there were some people like you just knew, like, and they'd ask us at the end and be like, this person is not even trying to be compatible. This person's, I mean, they didn't realize they were being watched by us. They're like, we just want to win. Like winning is not the point of improv. There's no.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other big kind of takeaway that I hope people get from this is that like really probably most people can benefit from working on their theatrical or dramaturgical toolkit. Another example, one that I love from Clown is, there's this expression in Clown called living in the shit. And it's really working on this ability to be able to fail in front of an audience and to not let that destroy you, to actually like be able to like stay in a moment of interaction and engagement that's not working. They're not excited. They're not interested, but you keep playing and experimenting and you keep going, and it's not the end of the world. You're having fun. That's a completely different way to deal with this sense of, failure in interaction is the worst possible thing that could ever happen. Right.
That sounds way better than coping with like bombing on stage as stand-up comedian. That is the worst. I swear stand-up comedy is like the most emotionally exhausting of all of the performance styles I've done.
I think that's because there is like, I mean, I think there is a community, right? You get off stage, there's other comedians. So I think it's not maybe like, I think maybe how they cope is at least if other comedians support you, then it's maybe not as bad. But yeah, go ahead, share with us. Tell us.
So it's funny. I started doing improv first, and where improv is extremely group oriented.
Yes.
Getting hive mind is something they hope to achieve.
Yeah.
Stand-up is extremely individualistic, and it can be like a not very supportive environment.
Right.
And I remember when I was moving into stand-up, one of the guys who I'd done improv with, he was like, it's a little too cultish for me. And I could, and it made it clear that I could start seeing the very different mindset. Right. And
he was saying that improv was cultish, right?
Yeah. Because you like, we did something called improv jamming or dance improv. I don't know. Basically where you just stay constantly in touch with somebody, improv dancing. And so you're always connected in one way or the other.
Contact improv.
Contact improv. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Jinx. Y'all owe each other drinks.
Yeah. So it's, you're making that's a really good point. Like if it's less communion oriented and it's more about competition, if you're someone who, it really just, what the tool is going to have to be, needs to fit the person and where they're at, right? And so obviously something like stand-up comedy, I didn't focus on stand-up comedy. I definitely think about it and I'm fascinated by it. I didn't do an ethnography of it. And hopefully this will inspire people to do research on more performance practices, because I think each one, we have different things to learn from each one. But it makes sense, though, from your experience that because it's inherently like there's less of a support system, that it's going to be much harder to feel good and connected. That doesn't mean that for someone it could work as, something that helps them grow. I think it just depends on the person and where they're at and what their needs are, which is one of the things that I write about. So it just depends. It depends on what you need in your toolkit, but always we need those. But even a comedian, especially probably a comedian, needs as much face ease as possible especially if they're bombing, right?
Yeah. So, sometimes you just gotta admit it and just,
so they have to figure out how to find face ease within a practice that's so that can be brutal if they're failing.
Yeah. I guess, now I want to go and watch a bunch of comedians who bombed and see how they dealt with it.
That would be every comedian.
Oh, yeah.
That's the brilliant thing. I think that is the thing that a lot of comedians take away from it, is that idea that at some point everyone's going to bomb and you just have to you're going to live through it. And then once you do, I think it's kind of there's a strength that can come from look, I survived that. It's such an awful feeling to be on your own, by yourself. Everybody in the room is disappointed in you, and you live. And that's I think why they call, they use terms like bomb and kill and things like that.
Yeah. And comedians, you can always hear when they're talking to each other, which there's a solidarity of yeah, man, I bombed, where it's they're really, there's a solidarity. There is a community there. So even though
it just takes a minute to ease in. It's not like improv where you're here, you're in. They're have you bombed? Have you been doing this for a while? Have you done you gotta climb some hurdles.
You have to be somebody who has to be ready for that. It's harder to get into it. But I do think because I love listening to comedians talk and interview each other, and there's always so much solidarity around the whole thing. Right.
But that definitely, it takes a while to get there.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Do you have any terminology or explanations behind why some of these things might feel so artificial if you objectively compare them to real life? Something like an exercise where two people stare at each other doesn't happen in regular life.
Unless you're playing a game.
No, exactly, right? So we're creating this artifice and game out of it in theater. And yet what happens is you end up in this more open and accepted and honest place.
Yeah.
So what's your thinking around the contrast there?
Around the contrast of actually explicitly making it a game versus.
Well, I just mean you're talking about in real life, people walk around often doing face work all the time. And like, that's a very genuine situation. And yet oftentimes we don't feel authentic.
Right.
And now we go to this situation where we create a completely invented situation in theater and then become more authentic there.
Yeah, I understand your question now. Yeah. So actually what I argue around this is that that's the beauty of naming the thing. And like actually like having a space where you're like, we're going to actually just practice eye contact right now, or we're holding space in some way, whatever, or we're going to do emotions now the way they do it. There is something really great about that, isolating that in that art, everything. The truth is, anyone like this is what anthropology unpacks, is that everyday life is everything is scripted and orchestrated and artificial in some way. We've just grown used to it. And it seems normal that you're all listening right now and I'm talking, but that's actually a poetic structure, right? For you guys to pause. Right. And so, yeah, and I loved how you simultaneously like made a noise. That was amazing. So, but you see, like we are constantly following a structure. It's just, we've been socialized into it. It's so ingrained. We're not aware of it a lot of the time. When you do a theater practice, you have to be aware of it suddenly. Yeah. And that is so instructive and liberating because we're all pointing at the same thing. We're all sharing it in our sights. We're saying, oh, we're actually looking at how we interact and we're going to actually work on it. And so there's a shared understanding that oftentimes also doesn't exist in everyday life because we're not really thinking about these things. And so it's actually like that communion over interaction creates the possibility for things to actually become more authentic because we're already more connected around what we're even doing.
Yeah. So we are running a little long. I do want to ask because I know.
Told you.
I knew we would. Well, there's so much to talk about, and which is why I definitely check out her research. I mean, it's some really great stuff. But I was curious, like. We wanted to make sure like what comes next. And like, I think it's a good question. I think putting theater and improv in schools would be ideal, like to help with interpersonal communications, honestly.
Yes. I mean, that's definitely a good idea. Like, I think so. I mean, I have all kinds of recommendations at the end of my dissertation for how this could be taken up. I really hope it inspires more research. I hope that it inspires drama therapists and other people who are practicing, whether in schools, as whether they're educators or clinicians, to consider these practices and to consider integrating them. And then I also for myself, like it's something where I'm definitely interested in, potentially helping people to think about how either to use these practices with different communities, as well as, I mean, I also just want to, I'm going to keep writing plays and everything as well, of course. Yes. And I would like to, but I think this can be part of that. Like if it's projects that are engaged with particular communities, like it can include some of this where it's like, okay, what are the tools that this community could benefit from, whether it's like, say it's youth or older, it depends. And what are the kinds of identity issues and interaction issues and so on that come up that would help them, connect in their lives. But then also, from an artistic point of view, really interested in just in creating engaged projects around whatever the question is, and include in a way that includes research with what people care about. So including ethnography, which is really ethnographic research is a way to understand how people live their lives. In whatever the context is. In this case, it was understanding these specific classroom practices that can translate to everyday life from theater, but this can be translated to anything. And I think, and from there, as a playwright and theater maker, I'd also
and doctor. And doctor.
Of philosophy. Yes. I'm really interested in creating plays that are engaged with contemporary issues in terms of how we think about ourselves, how we process the world. And you guys were in one of, a new play that I'm writing.
Yeah, we just did a little reading.
Little reading, so that's exciting. So I'm, we'll see what happens next, but I'm really happy to put this information out there, and we can put up my contact information.
Yes.
So if anyone is interested, wants to learn more, wants to collaborate, or talk to me about their community or whatever, if there's something that resonates here in terms of all the possible identity issues. And this could include, there's so many potential, there's so many stigmas that we all live with, and you can't name all of them.
Right.
We're aware of so many of them, whether it's, gender, race, disability, age, whatever it is, but there's a million others. Right. And so, I'm really, hopefully this is resonating, and please reach out if
some of the comments definitely, it is definitely resonating with some people.
Great.
And I just want to make sure that because this is radio and this is in the airwaves, that I also do have the archive of these shows on my YouTube. Mm-hmm. So that is a very loud siren out there. I don't know if y'all could hear that. Chicago, hey. So if you go to my YouTube or my Facebook or my Twitter or TikTok or wherever, I'll have a list of all of the locations that you can contact Marianna at. And so that'll be, if you go to my YouTube, Rachel Bloomstrom, and you'll find this episode and you'll see all the beautiful faces of the people here in the studio. So yeah, awesome. Is there anything else you want to wrap up before we move on to the general news and introduce our next two guests who are joining us?
I think this was pretty, for what it was, I'm impressed at how comprehensive this actually ended up being. And I think let me see.
Logan, you got anything?
Good job. We got most of it.
Yeah.
You guys were amazing at
it's a 500-page dissertation we just talked about.
I feel like for this time slot, I feel like we did well. And I would just say I encourage people to not only try different theater practices if this is resonating and there's something you've considered that you think would help you with whatever skill, but also I have a chart in my dissertation that describes some of the examples that I gave, like eye contact for trust, for example, or for connection.
Oh yeah, I can edit that into the video as well.
We could add that chart maybe. Yeah. So I really encourage people to try that, but also to find groups where you have communion, because that's also beyond theater. That's just the idea of okay, we need places where we can feel authentic.
Well, that's why I loved improv, is because if you go to improv, the community is built. And now you get in a troupe and you are part of that community, because it just doesn't function without accepting literally everybody. And it's a wonderful lesson also to teach you how to accept people who are different as well.
You guys are not alone if you think you don't know how to talk about your suffering. None of us do.
Yeah.
That's the other takeaway.
Awesome. Well, okay. I'm going to go ahead and bring in our next two guests. They're joining us virtually. Let's see if they are there. We're looking at Kevin Sparrow and Ji Yang. Are you there?
Hi.
Hey, welcome, Kevin.
Hi.
Ji, you there?
Yes.
Hey, welcome. Good to see you. So we did just wrap up to talk about Marianna's research. It was super fun. I know you caught some of it. So, if y'all have any questions, we can go ahead and talk about those. But let's go ahead and get you guys introduced first. So, Kevin, tell us about yourself.
I'm Kevin Sparrow, they, them pronouns. I'm a playwright, theater artist, advocate, administrator here in Chicago. And I also host a horror movie podcast called The Calls Are Coming From Inside podcast.
Ooh, I can't wait. G?
I'm also based in Chicago. I'm an artist curator. I work mostly for community-based organizations. We do a lot of community-based works, art activism stuff.
Awesome. 1 second. I just got to say that we're no longer going to be streaming from Facebook or TikTok. So if you want to continue watching the show, move over to my YouTube or the radio. Thank you. So did y'all have any follow-up questions or comments about Marianna's research?
Gosh, I mean, I have so many questions, but I think it's more maybe about practice, because I know Marianna too, right? We're all working in theater together. So I think most of my questions would be more individual and following up on the research of how do we implement these strategies? How do we make that more of a possibility for not just theater people to get involved in, but, normies, civilians, we might call them.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that came up a little bit. Rachel suggested, in schools, and I definitely, I agree that that's one obvious place to potentially start. But really, any environment like that where people are open to learning and it's already set up for that, are obvious possible spaces where.
Yeah, anywhere you can force a captive audience to listen to what you have to say and you're stuck with it. This is what we're shoving in your throat, right?
and hopefully it will not feel at all like that.
No, no, I don't. None of y'all are captive.
Nope. Remember that totally goes against the face using thing. But yes, but the idea that, it's really this is the point is that this can be applied to many different environments and sets of issues, but that's why it would be important to look at, okay, specifically what does this community need, what are the identity issues involved, and so on, and what are they managing on a day-to-day basis, what are the tools from this that can help, and so on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank goodness this wasn't a heavy topic, because sometimes we go from heavy topics to news and I don't remember to put any good news in there. So now we can go to some heavier stuff because we are prepared. I think maybe one of the first things that might be interesting for us to get into is update on Ukraine and specifically on refugees. Marianna, especially, is just coming back from Europe, and I've been following some of the stories of what has been happening to the Black refugees who have been being treated pretty horribly trying to get out of town. Does anybody want to have any comments on that? I'll let you know, though, Boris Johnson did just get into some trouble. He tried to ship refugees that were coming into the UK to Rwanda. He just wanted to straight up, instead of letting them come there, put them on an airport and be like, well, they can go to Rwanda. And then the UN was like, that's cruel. As if Rwanda doesn't have a city as well. But the whole thing became just this huge circle of racism about not wanting these refugees and then wanting to send them to a country that the UN also was insulting. I don't know. That was a mess, but. Mm-hmm.
Is UN or EU gave the pushback?
I believe it was the EU. I'm sorry. You're right. It was the EU.
Because England is not England, but Great Britain is on the board of the human rights boards of EU, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have such.
It's really funny though, because Rwanda started that project and because it's kind of almost like a new business model for them. Because from my understanding is refugees arrive to Rwanda and they will give the options either to stay in the country or going back to their country of origin. And they will be it's more they were paid by. I don't think it's only Great Britain, but also Denmark.
Right. Well, I know that right before they were about to deport them all, they were able to ground the plane. I caught the tail end of the story on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. He does it much funnier than I'm talking about it. But yeah, it's
Don't be
very
funny on this kind of issue.
It's
maybe once or twice, but not.
Yeah. He's very special like that. He can make pretty tough issues pretty funny. But I know that you were in Israel, right?
Yeah, I was based in Israel the past few months, and so I'm originally I was born in Ukraine, and it was part of the former Soviet Union when I was a child. I was born in Kiev. and immigrated when I was a kid to the U.S. But I still have relatives in Ukraine and friends, and being in Israel during this period, I have gotten to see refugees, the way that Israel's trying to support them, and also I was trying to support them because it's a personal, my relatives were fleeing from Kiev a couple months ago in a train where they had to turn off the lights so that they wouldn't get shot at. And they were fleeing across the country. So
that is horrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, just like on a personal level, I've been just, from the beginning was really anxious about it because I was worried about the safety of people I care about. And also it's really heartbreaking to see the way that just all these beautiful places in Ukraine are being destroyed, and, places from my childhood, and all these gorgeous cultural institutions and monuments and artwork and all this stuff. I mean, it's devastating. So yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can do from afar, though. Like we had donations come to our place at one point from different neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and we early on, within like a few weeks of the war starting, shipped some things like diapers and just blankets, things like that, to help people. But people that are people that are running away, or people that have nowhere, they're already displaced. So it's just like thinking about, well, what can you do for so many people that are either displaced or, others are just trying to hold down the fort somehow. So yeah, I've been aware of that situation and somewhat involved. And then I've also been traveling around Europe a little bit. So I have seen, it's just been really strange to see like Ukrainian refugees pop up all over the place, like in a train in Switzerland in the mountains, and they're talking, and I can hear them talking about how, well, where did my friends end up? Or here, I ended up here. And it's just this bizarre, it's just like this flood, because it's millions of people, right?
Yeah.
And you can see them all over Europe right now. And I will say that with Europe, you can definitely see a lot of solidarity. There's flags, like in Italy, there were Ukrainian flags all over the place. Like at I was at a theater festival, and at the beginning they would make these statements of solidarity with Ukraine from before they would even start the show, things like that. So it's just this crazy traumatic thing, this weird, bizarre, painful thing that is happening throughout Europe, especially. You can see it because that's where most of the refugees are going. And, of course, European countries are, for that reason, especially aware of it, because they're directly involved in trying to house and help these folks.
Yeah. Yeah. Have any of y'all been following the war very closely?
What's weird is, I feel like there's so many different aspects which you could pay attention to, because there's so many stories that you hear from one perspective about, like, how is the refugee situation, or how is like the conditions for the citizens back from the front of the war, basically, or what is it like in terms of the actual battles going on. And over again, it just seems like there's so much information getting out, and yet it's hard to piece it together and get any kind of cohesive sense of what's really going on, because all the information seems spun by different organizations, and
and like, because like the experience of white refugees has definitely been different than the experience of Black refugees. I shared a video recently, a reporter in Germany, a Black man, I was talking about how he and other Black Ukrainian citizens were removed from a train that was going through Germany, even though they had purchased their tickets, they were set up correctly for everything. And what they did was they took them all off of the train, and they said they had to verify them in a different way, which they had already done all of this. And then they took them to this weird place And I'm summarizing this very quickly, but they got to the point where they did a forced strip search on this guy, and all he was doing was traveling through the country on a train. And like, even if you were a mule, you don't have to like look inside of people's bodies. But what they did was just completely degrade this poor man. And like, it was so traumatic to listen to him tell this story. About having grown men in authority just telling you to take your clothes off and like bend over and turn around. And like, there's literally no reason for that at all. And and that was in Germany, I guess, I feel like all of us can definitely like hope for more from Germany. At this point in time.
Can we?
Right. Like I was an exchange student there in 1999. And like, I even studied World War II. And so like my impression was, oh man, they've come so far. And then ever since this, in Syria as well, like in the response to the Turks, like, yeah, like even the country that is like so ashamed of their Nazi past still has these openly very racist things happening. So I don't know. It's pretty frustrating.
Oh yeah. No, there's still so much racism in a situation like this. Just brings out the stigmas that have been there and they're still there. And as a Jewish person, I track the anti-Semitism, and there's been so much from Russian media that's just really horrifying around blaming Jewish people. I mean, all the worst things that you can imagine are coming out, right?
And then on the good, like the Russia. So we did a show on the foreign influence campaign, and like some reason, all these like alt-right Americans think that Putin is anti-Nazi and he's denazifying Ukraine. And I'm like, he's hired literal Nazis to kill Jewish people. What are you talking about? Have any of y'all heard about this?
I mean, that's the propaganda.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's his main line is that's his goal is to denazify.
I mean, he's completely out of an Orwellian novel.
Yeah.
And I think intentionally so,
So crazy to me. But maybe we shouldn't linger too long on that. I do like to always bring up some Black Lives Matter news or things associated with LGBTQIA plus community. This week, we do have a story that is a crossover. A trans woman named LaDamian Dwayne Hall died while in police custody. While being misgendered. The last word she ever heard was sir. And she was clearly having a mental episode. So I watched the video of the police handling it originally. And I think, honestly, they did an okay job. They also had paramedic there, and she was spiraling out. She was paranoid. She was dissociating. And they kept saying, can we get you some medical help? And I feel like they did an okay job, but then when they put her in the back of the paramedic unit, they put a spit mask on her, which there was no clear reason why they did that at that time. And she was struggling and having difficulty breathing, and they did not give her any medical care in this car. Mm-hmm. They left her. She was locked up. It's still in handcuffs, and she died while stopping breathing while they watched. One of the paramedics that you can see from the video cam, he's just on his phone scrolling, and she like screams at one point, and he just kind of smirks and giggles like, and keeps going. I mean, like, I can't even understand. Like, they didn't check her vitals. And when she finally stopped and she was quiet, he got up like he was going to do something, and then he sat back down. So the police chief said at 3:39 they started CPR, but according to the video I watched, she had stopped breathing by 3:34. And I know you looked at this story too, Kevin.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, so there was about 30 minutes when Dee Dee, and I'm gonna put Dee Dee Hall out there as what we call her by, because again, the misreporting, also makes it really difficult for us to know exactly what are people's names, their names by choice, by what they wanted to be called.
Right.
But Dee Dee's cousin, who talked to the Dallas Morning News, used Dee Dee repeatedly. So I'm going to use Dee Dee to call her and go by her name.
Yes. Thank you for getting that.
But there's about 30 minutes where she's in the hood telling them, you know, she can't breathe and screaming and struggling with that. And the paramedic, yes, like you said, was pretty callous towards that experience and is telling her just breathe, right? Like that is useful advice in this situation, which it's.
But she's like clearly in a very serious mental health episode. I'm sorry, did we lose you for a second?
Just for a second.
Yeah. What I was just saying is that she was clearly in a very mental distressed episode. And like, I mean, when they first started talking to her, oh God, she like the thing that haunts me is she was so terrified. She didn't even want to say a word at first. And then one of the first things that comes out of her mouth is, I don't want you to kill me. And like that, you know, that's a haunting line that I feel like I hear from a lot of these stories.
Right. And that it's a cyclical thing, makes it really, I mean, not just sad, but enraging at this point, right?
Yes.
It's not unavoidable, right? Police, paramedics, people in these positions of power and authority have every option to not do this. They have all the knowledge of all of these instances that have happened before and still choose cruelty. It's just so enraging to me. But I guess the thing that I wanted to get into also was that this occurrence happened on May 26th, right? Yeah. So we're just kind of hearing about it now, more than 2 weeks later, because the body cam footage that shows this wasn't released for 13 days. And so the general policy has been about a 72-hour turnaround of this body camera footage. Obviously, there are loopholes. Obviously, there are ways to get around it. I think it is one of those things that contributes to the underreporting, the late reporting, the poor reporting of these common occurrences of murders of Black women in general, Black trans women specifically, that really should be, I don't know, dealt with or at least understood by anyone who's like media conscious.
Yeah, definitely. I follow an account on Instagram, and they're an organization called Breathe, and like this had hardly any views. So I grabbed the video and I shared it on TikTok, and it took a few days before people even started noticing it, and then all of the bigger accounts started getting tagged in my video, and like literally none of some of who are the general watchdogs had been clued in. I try to always stay on top of these things as well. So you're right. This story really was very close to being buried.
Mm-hmm. But this week, as of this week, the paramedics, the driver and the paramedic that we see in the footage have had their credentials suspended as of June 13th. That doesn't mean there's been any administrative action or anything. It's just kind of where things stand now.
I mean, I feel like at the very least, they should be losing their medical license, because if you're not going to treat a patient in while they're under your care, then you have no business being a paramedic or a doctor.
Yeah, it's a common occurrence, and it's frequently happening. So I think I wanted to tie this also into just the general anti-trans, anti-LGBT, even as a general category sentiment that's happening as we see more bills being passed, as we see more language happening that is anti-trans and transphobic in nature, just to be careful of that and to be careful of the media sources, I guess, that you use for that. The New York Times has been doing a really terrible job recently at gatekeeping and keeping the anti-trans voices out. There's a very particularly transphobic strain going through their reporting. That's
interesting. I didn't realize that was true about the New York Times. I that's why I like following places like Breathe organization or LGBT Nation and things like this, because they're straight focused on people of these specific communities, whereas like major media obviously is not going to cover it.
Yeah, try to find, sources that are covering it more closely, who are within the organization. I mean, there was good reporting, I feel like, from that Dallas Morning News article that came out this week was pretty helpful.
I haven't
and
seen
yeah.
Can I ask, so do you all think that the part of what created this or exacerbated this was identity distress that this individual was experiencing in that situation? Was that, do you see that as part of the story? Because you said misgendering, they were called sir.
Well, that didn't start till they were alone in the back of the truck. And she was already pretty distraught. She'd started taking her clothes off. And that's when they were trying to put her clothes back on. And she was talking about God and the devil. And she was danger. I'm not a doctor, but one of my best friends is schizophrenic. And to me, it seemed like maybe she was having some sort of
episode.
Yeah, schizoidal episode.
Yeah.
Because she didn't seem to be able to keep remembering where she was, and she was in and out.
I see. So it's more like it made it probably worse because it's like she disconnected even more.
Yeah, probably because, trying to bring somebody back into I can imagine like somebody trying to like get you to come back to pay attention like where you are, and they're not. And they're calling you something that you don't know.
Identify with.
Yeah, if somebody was calling me sir, I would not assume they were talking to me.
Right. And if it's a painful issue for you too, then it's even more so.
Yeah. And, but the thing is, they put this spit mask on her. She says she can't breathe. She's struggling. And you can see the moment that she takes her last breath. Like, I don't know why they didn't even take it off. They didn't give her oxygen. They didn't check her vitals. They did nothing. They just sat there scrolling on their phones, watching her die.
The whole thing does show the importance of cameras and body cameras as well. Like you were saying, how the video was not released at first, and then probably nobody would have known. And then eventually the video is released and only some people know about it.
Yeah.
So, it's something I think that people are starting to reconcile, the idea that if you are in a situation that's happening like that, you may not remember it the way that it happened, and you may think that the video is misrepresentative. But as long as we're not assuming things other than what was on the video, but when you see a video of something like that, you're seeing what really happened.
Yes.
I mean, that's the evidence is not changeable. So
do you remember that woman who the elderly Black woman who she was having an episode like Alzheimer's or something, and the police were like banging on the door like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to tase you, come out, blah, like super antagonizing her. And then they broke in there and tackled her and busted her head. And then when she was outside, somebody new walked up and said, why are you bleeding? And she goes, they tackled me. And then the cop said, no, you were bleeding when we came in. And the other police officer was there. He looked at him like, what? But continued to let him gaslight her. And she's already having it and thought he could get away with it because nobody would check the video.
Right. And I think it's important to point out, right, that's vulnerability. This isn't necessarily an isolated case, right? This happens to people who are especially vulnerable because of racism, because of anti-mental illness sentiment, and especially because of anti-trans sentiment. I was looking up some of the statistics from the 2015 U.S. transgender survey that the National Center for Transgender Equality put out. And they reported that particularly for Black transgender people, all of these factors to their vulnerability are in place, right? 20% unemployment rate, 38% living in poverty, 34% reporting negative responses from healthcare providers, or even having to teach the healthcare providers about what they need as trans people. And 2/3 of Black trans people responding to this survey said that they would feel somewhat or very uncomfortable asking the police for help. So there is a lot of vulnerability and there's a lot of lack of protection. So that's information that I wanted to, make sure put out there and put out
definitely mental illness
survey for people to fill out, because there is a current survey now.
Oh, you can go do it now.
They're gathering data for that. So
okay, can they go?
if any of the listeners want to go to transequality.org, this is specifically a survey for trans people, trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary people, to take and report on where things are at. So you can go to transequality.org or ustranssurvey.org. Either link will help you
be
get
sure
to the survey.
I'll be sure to get the link and put it in the doobly-doo here on YouTube. And I wanted to say that's from the Idea channel. But the other thing I did want to mention real quick is also people with mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by the police. Mm-hmm. So especially, Black people experiencing mental health crises.
Yeah. And also what Kevin was saying, I mean, that's something also that I found in my research and was part of the point that I was making about identity distress is the more stigma categories that you can be put into, it just compounds the distress that you can experience in everyday life. So I mean, that's really like, it's the more you have to manage, the more you have to contend with, the more ways in which you can, I mean, in this case, encounter violence. So it's really, I mean, there's so many scales and levels to this, and it really is a compounding thing in terms of stigma around identity.
Because the toll on your mental health will also increase the odds that you interact with EMTs and police also, who are also going to not treat you as well.
Well, I would say it's the other way. Like the toll is taken because the interactions are so difficult and painful oftentimes.
Yeah,
right?
Oh, definitely. Police often exacerbate. I mean, and a lot of times they'll do it on purpose because you can just see some of them get kicks out of like harassing people. That's why I don't know. Have y'all ever watched that channel Cop Audit or Cop Watch? No. Sometimes they have people who will go and they are police auditors, and they'll go on like one guy, he just went and he was just he was dressed kind of like a homeless person, and all he did was like walk around and sit down in between cars at the park because he was just tired. But like that's something people have called the cops on. This guy is sitting on a curb in between cars. Let's call the cops. And so they did, and like they got brutal with him, and they were like, tell us your name, and he's like, I don't have to do that. I'm not going to do that. And luckily there's people out there risking themselves, because some of them do get really messed up. I have to constantly remind myself not to cuss on this show. So nobody else seems to have a problem with it, but almost lost it there. But I mean, that's how it's a really great way to see how police are responding to just people doing nothing. There's like, what is so suspicious about a person walking around a park and then sitting down? I mean, there's mostly empty parking lot too.
Yeah, that entire concept of stigma management, like that's what it means, is like the more you have, if you have a particular stigma that you can be categorized at is in some obvious way, like if it's visual, right? Like you have to somehow cope with that every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course you get cops who are bullies, and then they see that and they go after that. Right. Like all of the things they start doing to instigate are specifically things that
training
to trigger people. And it's so that they can take them down and arrest them.
Yeah. So I was going to try to find a positive. I mean, I didn't really find a positive story related to LGBTQ, but I was trying to find a positive spin. And I think one thing to notice and pay attention to, and if you are organizing, is to consider this. There are a lot more Pride organizers. We are in Pride Month, so there's going to be Pride parades, things like that. But a lot more of these organizers and groups are making it a focus to keep police out of Pride. To not march in prides and represent themselves as friends to the LGBTQ community, which historically and even currently they have not been. And so I think that's an important activist point, or a point of that if we as LGBTQ people and allies, people who would be attending these events, can support as parade marshals or as people who are trying to make sure that these are safe spaces without the need for police intervention. That is a really positive way, I think, to go about it, a way to grow and to show
Kevin,
that we have a different community protection we need.
Kevin, do you know anything about the parade in Aurora and the police not being involved in that anymore?
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole other thing. Well, that's super Illinois specific, but yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a local radio station, even though we're broadcasting to the general webs. But yeah, I mean, we can talk about some locals because I was going to say, I believe here in Chicago, Kelly Cassidy, one of my state reps, had mentioned that they were going to be implementing a mental health distress place to call instead of 911. I know when I found somebody, I just called the police. I'm not the police. I called the fire department. I wouldn't call the police, but I thought somebody had been assaulted or something and they were like passed out and their pants were like all the way down and they were unresponsive. So I did not call the police. I called the fire department and then they decided to bring a paramedic, which I feel bad about too, because we're poor and you always feel bad, but and we kind of grew a crowd and somebody saw the police, like a police officer approaching. We're like, oh, no, we're all good over here. Nobody needs to come over here. I was like, woo, thank goodness. But did you hear anything about this, that we're getting another, like, I don't know, 511 or something, or you can call 311 for a mental health crisis team?
No, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I swear I heard. Let me double check on this.
Sure. There's always other support. I can also offer lifeline.org as a supporting place if it's not specifically for trans people and mental health. That's one resource as we're looking for things.
Can you say that resource and you broke up a little bit?
Oh, sure. It's translifeline.org. And if I'm still breaking up, I'll add the number on too.
That time it was super clear. You did not break up at all.
Oh, great. And their number is 877-565-8860 in the US. So if you are a trans person specifically looking for mental health support, that's a thing. But also have a local number, for us in Chicago.
Yeah, great. And I will be sure to update the YouTube description to include all of these. Did you say you had another piece of LGBTQIA news?
Oh, my other piece was just about the community moving police out of our pride parades.
Yeah, good. No, and I heard about that too. So, anybody following the insurrection hearings?
Heard about a little bit more information coming out around that today about what Trump didn't do. Basically, all the options, all the people telling them do something. Right, you have to do something, and him calling Pence a wimp or maybe other things.
The P word, exactly. Which I mean, we all know the P word is strong. They squeeze babies out and bounce back, not like a little other dangly thing that you get a little flick and then that hurts. Learned that from Betty White. Thank you, Betty. She said, quit calling people that if you want to imply they're weak, because that is not correct.
It kind of shows a little bit though the mentality of him, of Trump, that like it seems like is his concept that's what is lacking. I guess he's like, that's why I'm so great, is because only I have the confidence required to
kind of
lie about everything.
Yeah, I mean, basically, so it was really interesting. So Mike Pence, who I don't know, Kevin and G, maybe you remember when I was in my grad school, I started the news show, the I Wish News, my surreal satire news show. And I was going.
I remember it well.
Yes, and I was
your co-host.
Yes, you did. Yeah, for the filmed one that G never finished editing for us. I got you, G.
Oh, geez.
I don't think you.
I mean, I have some excuses, but
okay.
I'm not going to touch on the station right now.
Fair enough. Well, I learned how to edit since then, so I could still fix it. But I spent a lot of time going after both Ted Cruz and Mike Pence because I thought, well, everybody else is going after Trump. They don't need me. But I guess they needed more voices because it wasn't enough. But I did keep Cruz out of the presidential election, so you're welcome, America.
Oh, thank you.
But unfortunately, Mike Pence, who is such a terrible person, may be the entire reason why that coup was not successful, honestly, because they were trying to get him out of there to protect him. But also the allies of Trump were the ones who were very insistent on trying to put him in this motorcade and get him out of there, take him anywhere so that he couldn't do his job. And it came up to the wire that he was standing outside the car and like he told them, he's like, well, I don't want the rest of the world to see this 20-car motorcade running away from these rioters. I don't want to see. But the truth was, as one of the other Ruben Gallardo, Democratic representative, said, that it would look like they have lost if they all run and evade. And it also, they may not be any safer in a motorcade if they all get into these buses. But the truth is, if they left their post and didn't finish, then it would look like an actual defeat. And that occurred to Pence, that the job must be done. And there's arguable things that they might be safer to stay where they are than to get moving. But yeah, I mean, Trump was also behind, like he was trying to use this crowd of people as leverage to get Mike Pence out of the building so that he could not certify the election. So, and any sort of that, I mean, even just metaphorically, it's a loss. And so
is that analysis or some other people's reading of the events going?
That's coming out of the insurrection committee hearings. So it was kind of put together by several different people. The Ruben Gallardo, I think I'm saying his name wrong. He gave an interview and he sent text messages to all of the other Democrats like, do not leave. We might never come back, because if this is lost, who knows? Maybe they will say we are instilling our own government. It could have been, it's hard to say how likely, but and so when they were talking about Pence did not say that specifically was his reason. He said he did not want the world to see this 15-20 car motorcade drive by all of these rioters because of the image that would send to the world, which is also something very serious to keep. But, I mean, he was their number one threat. They're walking around, they're building this guillotine what's a hanging thing? A hanging platform.
The platform?
A noose. Yeah. They made a whole platform.
A gallows?
Gallows. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're doing semantics today.
Yeah. It starts with a G. I was close.
Like for the whole situation, I actually, like as a foreigner, I have a question. Because I am aware of the Department of Justice had an investigation into the insurrection by itself. I don't know, why the Congress needs to take on another investigation onto the committee. On one sense, it's good to reveal some of the details, maybe not so it don't have to be to the criminal level, but can use as people are interested to see some of the details coming out, but also because the committee itself is run by people clearly have some political thinking on their mind. So I will be aware of that too. Take whatever information or conclusion coming out of the committee, like the Congress committee, with the grain of salt.
Yeah, that's interesting because I brought up also, I guess Reese has decided to join the conversation. I had also, because the Department of Justice about a month ago had tried to officially subpoena them again, because the Insurrection Committee was not sharing any of the testimonies with any other criminal justice departments in the country, including states that were, prosecuting people. They were waiting until they were all done. And the Insurrection Committee cannot actually prosecute anybody. It's not a criminal organization or prosecutorial body or whatever. So there is question about the corruption in the Department of Justice, and that some of the reasoning they've said is they want to make sure that they have all of it. The committee is made up of bipartisan people in Congress. And I think, honestly, like they have done a pretty thorough job, and it is their job to investigate. I'm not sure what sort of consequences they can do because I know it's not criminal. Mm-hmm. But it's, these people need to be in jail. And I suppose maybe they waited to be able to put this case together to show the people that and leave zero room for the Department of Justice to not be able to prosecute them. I don't know.
Talking about corruption, look at those people on the panel of the Congress investigation. I would not hesitate to remove that word from them neither.
Yeah.
Also, another question I would have to hear you lovely people talking about is because when the January 6th, when the insurrection happened, it mostly feels like it's the end of Trump's popularity, because this is such a outrageous thing, and everyone was united behind the good behavior. We need to do this thing right, but fast forward to now, it seems like Trump's popularity is popping back up. So I was wondering what happened during this time, and if that's become the needs of to have the Congress hearing back up.
I have a theory.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I mean, you were saying, Rachel, earlier that it seems like the congressional is it committee?
Yeah.
Took their time investigating, right? So that's sort of spread this out over more time. But if you analyze Trump's popularity and you look at that period right after the insurrection, there were definitely a lot of people speaking out against the insurrection that were Republicans.
But more of them closed ranks.
Yes, more of them did at the time. And then over time, more and more of them have walked it back, especially people like Ted Cruz. Really kind of no, everything I said about it being bad, that was a mistake on my part, I apologize.
And then he had to go apologize on Fox News.
Exactly. He went on Fox News and took everything back he said things about it being, I think I don't remember the details, but he was critical of it, and now he's saying there was nothing to criticize. But I think what happened is just this sort of absence of an identity within the Republican Party. They all started looking forward to elections and thinking okay, well, if we do abandon Trump, what are we going to go with? What are we going to sell the public on? And didn't really come up with any answers. And so I think that was the strategy that just sort of resulted in the right wing in America sort of returning to Trump over time, because there were more people that were critical right after January 6th when that happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I thought I would put a little feeler out in the water. So after the third day I did a little TikTok that said, I wonder why all the Trump supporters have been so quiet. And they weren't quiet after that. They had plenty of things to say about it. It's a pretty funny read if you want to go check it out.
You mean they were supportive right after it happened?
Oh, no. I was just saying ever since the hearings have started, I haven't heard too much from Trumpers. And then so they decided to come to my page and roar and rage. But unfortunately, so we've run a little long. Wow. I wish we had more time because there was so much good information to talk about with Marianna. And I'm glad that y'all got to join, and we definitely need to do it again. Marianna, of course, is transient, so we probably won't see her unless she can call in from somewhere. So I just want everybody to
I'll be back sometime.
Yeah. So everybody go ahead and just let us all know who you are again and plug yourself. So we'll start with Marianna.
Yeah. So, I'm Marianna Stroselsky, and like I said, playwright, theater maker, social scientist. Happy to share a little bit about my work with you. So yeah, I'm at this point in time, now that the PhD is done, I actually came into town for the ceremony. I'm very open to new projects and collaborations, whether that is of a more it can be of a more research and interventive kind of nature, but I also am very devoted to creating art and theater. So especially if the research can also lead to art making in some way. But yeah, please feel free to reach out, contact me if any of this is of interest.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said Dr. Stroselsky.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Doctor. All right, Logan Connor.
Yeah, Logan Connor, photography and theater. Generally, it's what we're talking about today. And since I have the platform, I just want to say birds aren't real. Do your own research.
Yeah, birds are real. Best movement ever. Ji Yang.
G Artist Curators. I work for a space called 618 North in Edgewater, and we're a community-based organizations. It's an art house. Come to visit us.
Awesome. And Kevin?
Theater artist. The easiest way, I guess, for most of a general listenership to follow me at the Calls Are Coming from Inside the Podcast, a horror movie podcast. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Calls Inside Pod.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll be sure to gather everybody's contact information up together. I am Rachel Bloomstrom. I'm the host of In Other News. You might have also seen my theater company. It's called the Quarantine Queens Theater Company, which is an online international all women plus theater company. We are on a brief hiatus as we're making some transitions. Next week, we will be returning to the series The Enemy is Woman into the manosphere, where we are exploring the depths of the male supremacy movement and how organized and active it has become. We're going to be discussing specifically the incel movement and the pickup artists, which are probably both the grossest and most violent of the manosphere. They are both pro-violence against women. And yeah, so just remember, this is the show where we will have main topics that are trying to cover things that either mainstream media doesn't cover, undercovers, or is misleading on. And then we have our general discussion of current events and politics and news. So if you want to know what else is going on, just find us here in Other News. That was my song, I Just Want to Make Out. It was a live performance, so I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week in other news. Okay. Okay. Did that.